Hey everybody. First, I wanted to say that the Phoenix Project is a great book. It's hard to find good books that are either entertaining or real technical quality, and this is a book that has both aspects, so you should definitively read it. We asked the entire sales and marketing team at CloudBees to read it. We even had a book reading session, so it's to tell you how much we liked it. So we spoke about continuous delivery first with Kurt this morning, and this is our view of continuous delivery when it comes to really the IT part. But as Kurt said, continuous delivery goes well beyond that, and that's what makes it interesting, I think. It's one of those topics where business meets with IT. It's not one of those deep technical topics only. It's really how we rethink IT in its entirety. And so, as you can see on that slide, continuous delivery is really what wraps both the continuous integration and the deployment aspects, and is a great way to put together both the development teams and the IT operation teams. So depending on how you're going to see it, and obviously the feedback loop. So it's not just we keep looking at things, you know, from left to right, saying, oh, I want to go faster. But I think a big part of continuous delivery is not just to go faster and go with smaller iteration, is what do you do with those smaller iteration? Well, you learn. You learn how to adapt, you learn what works, what doesn't work, and you have a much shorter time for that. The lag is very small, and so you can directly impact the decision if it was wrong. It's useless to wait 18 months to satisfy your business team if actually you realize that what you were building in the first place doesn't match what the market needs. So obviously, depending on who you are, you look at continuous delivery in a very different way. If you're a business person, you're going to see the business benefits associated with continuous delivery. For technical persons, it's really how are you going to establish this pipeline so that you change the way you actually build that software. And sometimes we get that question about, yeah, but how does it relate to continuous integration? Well, I think continuous integration was really where this continuous way to do things was born, and we extend that to the delivery aspect. So, but CI was really at the core of this. So when we speak about continuous delivery, and I hope it was clear in Kurt's presentation, continuous delivery relies in a big part on automation. Automation is a big way for you to succeed on your journey for continuous delivery. So to illustrate this, because sometimes we do those quote-unquote high-level presentation about the business benefits, and it's hard to see how tangible that is and what does it factually mean. And so I took an example of a company that's not known to be the leading software company, but that has some huge needs in terms of software, and that company is HP. So HP had a team working on firmware for the Future Smart series, so the high-end sophisticated printers, and they were facing big issues. They had their cost exploding, times 2.5 in just a few years. They had many branches for each of the type of products. Most of the team were working actually on porting the same software on new devices and so on, so it was very static. It was very hard to share among those different devices. Software testing was mostly manual, so a lot of time was actually spent doing work that's not useful to the business. So the business was not asking for new features because they knew it was useless to even ask. And technical people were not necessarily happy to do that work because a lot of what I'm describing here is not actually very tempting work for an engineer. And so all of this has been put in this book, Large-Scale Agile Development. You must be wondering why we want you to read so many books today, but it's a great, I think, a great example of how a team decided to change the DNA because they were facing a big problem in their ability to innovate and push software faster. And so in 2008, before they started, as you can see on that slide, a lot of time was spent on those activities that are not necessarily, very entertaining again. Detailed planning, 20% just on detailed planning. Porting code, 25%. How entertaining is that? Manual testing, 15%. Yet they still had a lot of quality issues in their software. And we're left with about 5% of innovation for that team, despite the cost explosion. And we're not talking about firmware here as in, mini firmware. We're talking about 10 million lines of code, so pretty substantial software. So in 3 years, they were able, in steps, to move from that level to a place where they've automated a lot of things. They've rethink the architecture, so it's not just about automation. It's about infrastructure as code. It's about flagging things so they can operate on multiple hardware and so on. One branch, working on one branch, working in an agile fashion instead of doing those huge static plannings that never work and so on. And at the end of their journey, they ended up with about 40% left in terms of innovation. And so automation was a big part of that. That's one of the graphs they've used to display what they were doing. So they split things in different levels of automation. You have L0, the level 0, which is kind of what you would do on your laptop, I guess. Level 1, which is really the cheap steps, the unit tests that would occur. And there, they would automatically revert code if things were not doing fine. So they went as far as making sure that if your code doesn't pass some basic test, it's out. You're not being asked. And then level 2, level 3, level 4, and obviously as you go further and further, cost might become more expensive, more complicated to do, and so they will occur less. So it's kind of a cascade of tests where you do cheap first and then more expensive, more sophisticated after. So again, maybe this won't apply to you. It's a use case that's worth reading. And so if we look at what it means in many companies outside of HP, obviously, we see that most of the time it all starts with CI. So development teams starting to automate some of their testing and the build steps. And so what you see on this picture, the red part, I'm not sure if I can actually, yeah. So if you look at the developer tools that they would use for building, they're going to have their own artifacts, right? So source code, test, configuration, and so on. And this will typically stored in a source repo, then a CI server will take care of it, and the artifact, the output will be stored in another repo. So the typical stream is I make a change to my source code or to my configuration, then it's detected, I perform some testing, and I store the output in a repository. And I do that in a continuous manner so that I can detect those issues as soon as possible. So once you want to move to the next step and do some testing, the idea is that you want to test in the same environment where it's going to end up in production. So the environment needs to be as similar as what the staging is going to be. So in that case, you're going to be extending this pipeline to do more than unit testing, but you're going to start provisioning some systems and configuring those environments in a continuous fashion as well. And so you might need some other systems, right, to do that work. But essentially, what you can see is that we're starting to connect different systems to build that ongoing pipeline. Where it gets interesting is that you start meeting with the ops team, right? The development team can do the first part of the work. Then the ops team needs to also work on this pipeline and provide the real infrastructure, the real provisioning that's going to take place, and so on. And they also have their own artifacts. So we talked today about infrastructure as code, so treating configuration as code. Same thing, right? You want to describe how this environment is going to end up in staging or in production. And what's interesting is that development teams and operational team are going to have different tools. They're going to have different needs, but they still want to be part of the same story. They still want to be part of the same pipeline, right? It's not two things. It's one thing that's going to drive all along, and at some point you'll need some tools, initially to just do unit testing, and at the end of the cycle, you might want to do things such as deploying real software on a real machine that you need to provision, totally different problem, but part of the same story, part of the same scenario. And so That's where you can typically see those slides where you're going to hear a lot about those tools as you build your continuous delivery story. You will want to use maybe Perforce or Git or Subversion for storing your code and configuration. You might use JFrog to store your binary artifacts. You might use Puppets or Midvision or Xibia Labs to deploy to those machines and so on. So all of this needs to be orchestrated in a unified fashion as part of the same pipeline. So again, what's so interesting about Jenkins, I think, and the importance of this orchestration server is really that even though developers and operational people have very different needs, they're going to focus on very different things. They will all meet where Jenkins sits. That's really where they want to make sure they have a coordinated story, they have a coordinated scenario that can go from source code to deployment. So another way to look at it is to see that Jenkins will typically initiate those builds, those tests and so on at different time in the history of a specific release. And it's going to cover a lot of different stages, right? So the dev team initially, then the QA teams, and maybe the dev team again, the ops team and so on. So it's really kind of a common denominator that will glue those teams, those virtual teams that Kurt was talking about, mixing lots of different talents to achieve the same business objectives. So talking about CloudBees and Jenkins here for a minute, what we're achieving on CloudBees is really offering an enterprise version of Jenkins. And so we've split, one way to see it is really to see that we have the Jenkins core, the core set of features that will be needed to perform your build at scale and so on. Then we have an infrastructure layer, some solutions, and operation at scale. So let me dig through some of that. So the core layer is really, how do you manage a farm of Jenkins instances? What we see in many organizations is that it starts with one master and a few build machines under a desk, and then it expands, and suddenly you end up with hundreds of machines doing build and test. And so CloudBees offers a way through Jenkins Enterprise to benefit from additional plugins, things like role-based access control, clustering, and so on. That's typically what enterprises are looking for in such an environment. And then they will want to make sure they can manage those deployments at scale. They want to make sure they can share resources, they can monitor those resources, those Jenkins enterprises, they can manage the plugins all at once and so on. So it's really a way to aggregate all of that farm of Jenkins instances from a unified point. And that software is known as Jenkins Operations Center by CloudBees, and that's a software that really runs on top of Jenkins Enterprise. All of this can run on a variety of infrastructure. You can deploy it on your existing hardware. You can deploy it on virtualized environment. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but on some cloud environment as well. Management, very important. You want to make sure that whatever you do, wherever you do it, it can be cloud, on-premise. You want to make sure you can monitor, you can manage, you can provision new instance easily, and so that's also part of the value add from CloudBees. And then solutions, what do you do with those? And so CloudBees is working through a series of scenarios, mobile being one, DevOps being one, and so on, that can help you get the best out of this stack for very specific use cases. How are you going to operate Jenkins Enterprise typically? What do we see? We see typically companies start this way, which is a few Jenkins Enterprise, Jenkins masters running on a bunch of machines somewhere in their data center, might be one per team initially. And then we see those companies think, well, we have too many of those. We realize we thought we had 5, we have 50 actually, and we need to bring some order in the house. So that's called Jenkins Operations Center. And so you deploy a first jockey instance to first unify those resources. Next step might be to leverage some private cloud infrastructure. So instead of doing everything on static machines, you might want to leverage the proof of concept you've done in cloud and start using those machines for some real workloads, for example, build and test. And so in that case, you can leverage Jockey to start scaling those resources on cloud environments. And then cloud is cloud, right? So if you want to do it on a public cloud infrastructure as well, yet still get a unified visibility at the Jockey level, you can do that. So that's very handy. You can get elasticity on your private cloud, and if you don't have enough resources, you can decide to scale that out to public cloud resources. And then you can end up on a fully managed SaaS, Jenkins SaaS, which CloudBees offer as well on the public cloud. So you have a variety of ways to consume and use Jenkins and make those build and test. And it's going to really depend on you and your specific use case, your policies inside your organization, what choices you've made to define how you want to use that, right? But I think what's important is that we provide a very flexible way to manage and operate those Jenkins infrastructure at scale. So what's amazing, I think, also about Jenkins, I was reading some numbers, and Kosuke can be very proud of that, I think. It really shows how lively the community is. 3 years ago, I think we had something like 200 plugins, and now we're at 1,000 plugins. So you might not need all of those plugins, obviously, and only the ones you're using are actually the important ones, obviously. But it just shows what problems it's fixing, right? It's fine to say we want a common bus where you define your workflow, your pipeline that's going to go from development to production. But along the way, you will need to integrate with plenty of different systems. And if you can't integrate, well, you can't do your job. And so one of the key features of Jenkins and the success of the Jenkins community is because they have so many extensions, so many plugins that can hook in so many different systems. You will always find the software, the plugins that makes it possible to hook Jenkins with your software. And if it does not exist, it will exist soon. So this is, in your journey towards continuous delivery, a key aspect that you should not neglect. Now, Jenkins, as you might know, is called Jenkins CI, not Jenkins CD. So Jenkins was really born out of CI. And so it, with so many extensions and integration, it was very natural for Jenkins to be used for CD as well. And so a lot of companies have started using Jenkins to do continuous delivery, but sometimes some of the features available to achieve that were cumbersome or limited in some fashion. So you ended up with too many jobs and so on. So that was an important part of an important project at CloudBees on how can we improve that? How can we make sure that continuous delivery and sophisticated workflows could be a first-class citizen as part of Jenkins? And so there is work going on right now. It should be released by the end of this year. It's called Jenkins Workflow, and it's really a big deal for continuous delivery. It's really a way to have sophisticated, complex workflow among Jenkins instances with sophisticated semantics. And we're also working on a specific dedicated visualization to make sure you can visualize your continuous delivery pipeline very well. So very big focus from CloudBees at this point. So my conclusion, as you've seen, I hope, is dev and ops really merge and meet where Jenkins is. And that's a very important feature of continuous delivery. You won't get continuous delivery if your teams don't work together. And what do we provide as part of this? It's really a way for you to operate Jenkins at scale, on-premise, in the cloud, or both, and make sure that it applies to your enterprise constraints. And stay tuned with some of the Jenkins workflow features that are going to be released. And some of them already got released, but there is more coming up very soon. That's going to further increase Jenkins' foothold in CD. Okay, so for the next part of my presentation, of this presentation, I'd like to welcome Chris Mills, who is CTO EMEA for Pivotal. I've known Chris for quite a while. We're colleagues at JBoss when we were still